All right, welcome to the next episode of the Rap Thought Podcast. And today we're going to be taking a deeper look into Tupac's Tupacalypse Now.
Yeah, with Black History Month approaching, this album seems pretty appropriate to talk about. It's one of two, I personally believe it's one of Tupac's underrated albums. Still not platinum. Yeah, it's a great album. It touches on a lot of political issues.
Yeah. Well, I think as we get into the album, we'll kind of see why it's his most underrated album, undersold album. Mm-hmm. I think there's a few pretty big factors as to why that is.
Yeah, definitely. I guess some things to start about the album. It came out in November of 1991. Some of the criticism that came was from Vice President at the time, Dan Quayle, where there was a murder in Texas, and he basically said out in public that, this is a record that shouldn't be. Basically, the masses should not hear because of its bad quote unquote bad influence. Mm-hmm. The guy was apparently influenced by Tupac's music and may have been a contributing factor as to why he murdered this person.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting conversation to have. I think at that time, especially in the early 90s, hip hop was just starting to reach the mainstream. It was just starting to go global and be on a bigger scale than previously. And when that happened, rappers started talking about more intense and violent things that they were around, that they were growing up in.
Right. And it's interesting just because they're painting a picture of things that they have seen or what they're used to or what family members have gone through. But mm-hmm. the media picks it apart as, no, this isn't necessarily happening, but you're cultivating this violent culture, mm-hmm. which is influencing people to do it more.
Right. I think it's so interesting how politicians thought back then. It's like, where were they when the movies were coming out that had violence in them? Like, where were they when Scarface came out? Wow. Were they protesting those? Were they speaking out against the directors and the actors of that movie? Like, what's the difference between an album like Tupacalypse Now and a movie like Scarface?
Right, is that not influencing drug culture and mafia mentality and everything? So what is the difference? But who knows? So Dan Quayle came out with that in 91. To build off of that, one of the things in an interview with Tupac that he mentioned was they created this Tupac machine where the media is painting him as a robot, and that he is, as we were saying, he's the reason why these things are happening. The media is making him out to be something. Mm-hmm. He always said, or in his interview, he mentioned how, I'm real. Like, I'm just reporting the things around me, where I'm not. Because he was also asked, well, the vice president, that when he said that must have been a really big thing for to get you publicity. He's like, no, that absolutely crushed me. With the president, like, he is appointed to his office. I wasn't appointed to my position. I just spoke what's going on around me. I told my story, and people they picked up my record. So it was just kind of an interesting contrast between the two of, how they hold the same platform by, getting people's attention. One's mm-hmm. painted in a light, but at the same time, you are labeled a certain way. So he called it, the Tupac machine. Yeah, and
for the listeners out there, if you haven't listened to this album, you probably haven't, just based off the numbers sold of this album. It went gold 4 years after it came out. Like you said, it hasn't gone platinum yet, so it's not his most heard record. But for this album, when you listen to it, it takes you aback. You're like, whoa, like, Tupac is really angry, and he's speaking about a lot of things that later in his career, he still spoke about those things, but he also had the other records where it was more geared towards the radio and being more friendly and kind of more inviting and more party atmosphere. So when you listen to this album, the whole album is centered around, his community and the violence in it and the injustices and dealing with police and criminal behavior. So he's surrounded by that, and he's just speaking out against it. It's a really intense album when you go through it.
Yeah. So this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but growing up, I actually did not like Tupac. I wanted nothing to do with his music. And I think it's more because in retrospect, I see it more as ignorance now. I thought of it as, it's just the thug life mentality. It's just this, slanging drugs, being in gangs, whatever else. But, now, nearly 20 years later, when I listen to his music, it's like, okay, that's actually not what that's about. It's very empowering. It's very revealing of what's going on in communities. And the thing too, Brandon in 2001 or whatever versus Brandon in 2020 is looking at this album. One of the things I really like is that it still holds weight. It's still talking about relevant issues. I don't know if that's a good thing. I don't know if that's a bad thing. It's a bad thing because, maybe not too much has changed in the sense of either it's being reported more often, whether you want to see it as it being reported more often, or it just has always been bad and it's there. Or, it's good that, hey, this talked on issues that were very significant at the time that still occur today. Right. So it's good and bad.
Yeah. I think at the time that this album came out, there was a big shift in hip hop happening. In the 80s, you had most of the hip hop, especially in the West Coast, was definitely geared towards having fun, going to parties, just not diving too deep into political issues. It was, you had rap groups just making fun music, and they're not really speaking about where they're coming from, or until like NWA came out in 1988, and then they really kind of like were the first ones to like really go there and take it to a new level and really speak out about things that they were saying that they thought was not right, which it kind of broke open the door, and now all these other artists are like, okay, we can speak out as well. We can go there on a major level. And that's what Tupac did. Like he took this opportunity to really speak his mind. And I think where that comes from is that he had family ties to the Black Panther Party. So like he already had that kind of mentality. He grew up around that. So he saw this as a platform to speak out what he wanted to speak out against.
Right. And going back to my point a little bit too, my perspective of how I felt, I'm not going to say that a lot of other people felt that way, but I wouldn't be surprised if a majority of people felt that way about Tupac, not listening to him. They're just like, oh, there's Biggie and there's Pac and there's those feuds. But, that's where I'm coming from. Like having listened to his music now, like it really is, it's deep. I feel like
now you understand why maybe some of the older people in your life were so into him. I think I'm in the same boat as you. Is I never really I did not like Tupac, but I never really got into him. I never really dove into Tupac.
That's how it was.
I heard his songs. I liked his songs, but I never really studied him and took a deeper look into what he was trying to say.
Right. And the majority of people, if you ask them, hey, what album should I listen to? Everyone will say All Eyes on Me. And they say, because it's basically a greatest hits album. That's probably better than his greatest hits album, arguably. And just with that, they'll say that everyone knows about the song California Love, but they don't talk about past albums. They'll talk about the ups and downs of okay, there was Thug Life, he was all pissed off and feud with Biggie, but I think his up until he died overshadows the foundation that he initially built and came off of, which I think is important, which is why we chose this album for this episode. So. Right. Yeah. I mean, from start to finish, I feel like the underlying themes of this album are, I'm going to say, empowering Black people, police brutality, conflicts in impoverished neighborhoods. The list goes on. It really goes on about real life situations.
Yeah, he gets pretty intense with what he's talking about. Like he's talking about like some of the songs, Brandon's Got a Baby, which most people are going to know that song. That's pretty much the only song that people know from this album.
Mm-hmm. Yes, from this album for sure.
Right, and that's a single. You put that out as a single, which is crazy to me. Like, think about someone putting out a single like that today.
Right.
About a woman who gets raped by a family member, gets pregnant, throws the baby into a dumpster, and then goes into a life of prostitution.
Right.
Like, he's telling a story about something that's real, that actually happened. Mm-hmm. And he put it out as a single. Like, he put that to music to reach people.
Right. And I personally don't think it's because, hey, I need to get these innocent. Bear with me as I say this. I don't think it was to, hey, I'm going to put out something so off the wall that people will listen to it. It was more of, I'm going to put something so real out that you will listen to this. It's going to, this will get your attention. This is real.
Oh yeah, this is going to stop you in your tracks, and you're going to be like, wait, what is he talking about?
Right.
Like, what am I listening to? And it kind of, perks you up a bit, and you're like, oh, let me like pay attention.
Right.
Let me see what he's trying to say.
Yeah. I really like how the album kind of builds up and talks about certain things. So like even from the first track where where young black male, where it goes into the perception of how a black man may be perceived in the community. So, they don't like when I cuss. They don't like the way I walk. They don't like the way I talk. They don't like when I do this or that. I'm automatically being painted. You could almost say that this, as the tracks come, they build onto each other and paint a picture. Because then Trapped talks about how he's in his neighborhood, and it's almost like a revolving door because there's violence, the education's not high, people, there's broken families, there's not a lot of opportunity to do things. So the only way to make it and to have some form of living is to get in the drug game, is to get in the gang related things for protection. So it's just a continuing cycle. So education's not important. And, a lot of, if you've seen Coach Carter, if you've seen, Freedom Riders, a lot of these people, they talk about how I don't expect to live beyond a certain age. So you kind of see a lot of that in Trapped. Just telling that story of, it's hard to make it out of here, and I feel trapped in this. And one of the things I really liked from that song, or it could have been the next one, was he really mentions about people getting locked up and coming out worse because there is no reform. So you're marinating in this community of all these negative things happening. You get busted for it. You go to jail. There's no reform. We took that out, I believe, in the 60s. I could be wrong, but we took reformation out. And so you go in, you marinate with more criminals and more of that environment. Then you come back out to the hood, and it's nothing happened.
Right, and I think that's an important topic. Like, a lot of people will say the prison system is just a new form of slavery.
Right,
it's free labor. And yeah, their goal isn't to turn you into a productive member of society. Like, their goal is to just keep you there and get free labor out of you, and that's the end of it. And you hear this a lot, is like people they go to prison, a criminal, and they come out a better criminal. They learn how to, it's almost like going to school and learning how the criminals operate, whether it's drugs or stealing, whatever. They're going to learn from other people of how they do those things.
Right.
And it's, it's unfortunate that, but we're speaking in general terms. I'm sure there's plenty of people that went to prison and came out and changed their lives and for the better. And, but they had to reform themselves.
Right.
They had to go within to make that change.
Right. But it's hard to oftentimes take that initiative to make that change, because that may be all that you know. So, what's the incentive to go? Maybe some people look at it as like, well, I have downtime, so I really need to change this. But, once you get out and you're on fresh air again, you already have the stigma to you. You've been to prison. You have a record now. It's already going to be hard to find another job. So, that kind of the other point from the song that he talks about is being targeted by cops. Mm-hmm. So, you have this target painted on your back already, and then coming out of prison with a conviction or anything like that, you have a bigger target painted on your back being watched.
Right. And I think there's a statistic where, like, the chances of someone, when they get out of prison, the chances are pretty high. The percentage is high of them going back.
Yes. I don't
know the exact percentage.
I don't remember right now either. But yeah, I've definitely heard that.
The first, 4, 5 songs, Young Black Male, Trapped, Soldier's Story, I Don't Give a Fuck, and Violent. Those are all, like, those are 5 songs in a row that are speaking out kind of about the same thing.
Right.
And they're dealing with violence and injustice from police or just being in that environment. So as a listener, when you're listening to that, it's a lot to take in, like, right away, like right off the bat. He's throwing you into the fire of, like, what he knows and what he sees.
Right. So as you mentioned those songs, the third track, he talks about, how soldiers are born out of violence and everything, and they thrive in it. The fourth track is in reference to an injustice of police officers and how they targeting people with, black people, or targeting people that just stereotyping certain things. Like, this doesn't look right, I'm going to watch this. Mm-hmm. And then leading up to the fifth track of being perceived, overall being perceived as violent. Mm-hmm. What do you think that when people, I don't know, I guess in those first 5 tracks, that concentration of being stereotyped by officers, the feeling that he gives off of, like, yeah, I'm being targeted, I'm being stereotyped. There's a lot of injustice. People are just coming out just to get me. That concentration, do you feel like it comes off as believable? Do you think that people see that as, like, that's a little dramatic just to add some more flavor to it? Or I don't know, what do you think the overall feel is on that?
I think, he's a storyteller, so it's hard to say. I'm sure for the song's sake, it could be dramatized, much like mm-hmm. movies, and even movies based off of true stories. There's gonna be some dramatization to make it more impactful.
Right.
You only have a short period of time to impact someone. Like, the song is 4 or 5 minutes long. In that span of time, you got to make an impact.
Right.
You got to tell the story. And whether he's pulling, it could be a situation where he's pulling, things from different stories that have happened, or real things that have happened, pulling one bad situation from this person. He's going to combine it with another bad situation from another person and make it into one story. Mm-hmm. Which could be the case. It's definitely believable. I don't think he's just rapping about this kind of stuff for the fun of it, or just because he wants to. Or I think he's genuine in what he's saying.
Right. I agree with that.
I think Tupac is, even from his later in his career, like, he's always been a genuine artist. Like, he doesn't hide behind a lot of stuff. From the stuff that he went through, he stood up to it.
Right. It's kind of scary how you can really tie it into current times. Mm-hmm. I don't know how. It's interesting to think about what would happen if this album was dropped now. Mm-hmm. How it would be taken up. I think it would fit right in with, mm-hmm. From 2018, 2016 up until now. I think it would fit right in. Me Too movement, Brenda's got a baby, that would probably fit right into there.
Right. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Obviously the production would have to be updated, but but the messages that he was trying to say, it's still relevant to today. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But I think transitioning from those 5 tracks and going into Words of Wisdom, I feel like that was almost him. He's like, all right, I just laid out all the injustices, all the things going on in my environment, in the ghetto.
Kind of like a summary of everything I've just mentioned.
And then Words of Wisdom is kind of like the solution. He laid out all the problems, And most artists will do that. They'll just give you all the problems. They'll say, hey, this is what's wrong. Police brutality. They're targeting us. Gang culture, whatever. Like, I can't go outside. I'm worried about getting shot. But they don't give solutions. They're just like telling their story. Tupac's, with words of wisdom, I feel like he's giving you a solution to get out of that, to go beyond it in knowledge of self, knowing who you are as a black person in this country, knowing your history, having the knowledge to take you out of that mentality.
Yeah, and to build on to what you were just saying too, I like how he takes the N bomb and he rephrases the acronym for it. So never ignorant, getting goals accomplished. Instead of he was saying like, we should not use the term as to down us, but we need to use it as a motivational thing, and by underlying that. So as you're saying with coming up with a solution, it's like we need to be aware of what's going on around us, how the odds are against us. We are being targeted. We we have to work extra hard in order to make the best out of this. So no, we have to be intelligent about our decisions. We have to set our goals. We need to know what to do. We need to execute these, and we need to get them executed.
Right.
We need to get out of here.
Having a plan of where you want to go, with not just with life and your community or with your job, whatever, but with yourself. Like, where do I want to go? Where do I want to be? Where do I fit into the society?
Right. And, we have this now too, where people talk about taking certain historical things out of wherever it is right now. So, there's a statue we want to take down because it has ties to the Confederate Army. And in this song, he mentions how they took away our history. They're scrubbing our history. They're making edits. So we're going to take Malcolm X out of history books because he rose up and was very vocal. But we're going to leave Martin Luther King in here. So even though he was vocal about it, he was nonviolent. So we can use it. So I like how he brings this up, just because you kind of, it makes the listener kind of think about like, man, is that intentional? Like, is that part of the plan to like, okay, we're going to give you this history, but we're going to refurbish it a little bit. Don't want people getting too many ideas.
Absolutely. I mean, that connects to almost everything in our history books. Like, you're not going in school and learning about everything we did to the Native Americans. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
You're getting a broad stroke of what happened, but you're not getting details of it.
Right.
You're not learning why or how or what we did to them.
Yeah, Christopher Columbus he came over here and just discovered it.
And then a couple hundred years later, they're gone.
Right.
Like, they kind of skip over all the, all the bad things that happen. And I think that's the same thing with what he's trying to say with like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. It's like the American public we can stomach Martin Luther King.
Right.
We can't stomach Malcolm X, so we got to
he needs to go under the rug. But we'll let you have them, okay. So but yeah, Words of Wisdom, I believe, is one of the deepest the deepest track on the album. It's, as you said, it's a summary of the previous tracks, but encompasses elements from the future tracks, and it lays down the foundation of like, here's the problem, this is what we need to do. And I don't know if it gives like the clearest answer, but it gives like, this is what we need to do, and it's different
from a young age. Tupac knew it starts with yourself,
right?
Like, you gotta make the change within yourself. Like, you gotta start there and then go to your community. You know what I mean? Like, because if you're not good, like if you're not in the right place to help others, like, you're useless,
right?
If you're not able to start that with yourself. So he's like really like pushing like, hey, like, know who you are,
right? Right. The situation around you, but you need to learn about yourself. Don't let the environment define you. You need to learn about yourself, make these changes. Again, a lot of the same elements, but kind of not, I'm not going to say personal, but it gets more. The first couple ideas encompass the broad thing. Now it's giving kind of
more
tailing
specific
examples. To friends, family members, people around him. I like Crooked Ass Nigga just because it talks about the cops. They're crooked. We've mentioned numerous times before that they're targeting certain people and everything. So, but even black people within the police force, they're perceived as crooked because it's like, hey, you're going against your people here. Right. But in the last verse, he talks about, I'm crooked too. Like, I'm going in and I'm robbing these people. I'm doing this. Like, I'm also crooked. Like, I'm doing things out here to survive as well. So yeah, I'm going to be perceived as crooked from time to time. So kind of gives a definition of what being crooked is, and
right,
yeah,
and it's giving examples of it. I thought it was interesting how he went from that song to If My Homie Calls. It's like a very stark contrast.
It can be a contrast, but then also kind of the same, because in that song he's really preaching loyalty. So when you're crooked, sometimes like your homie needs something, regardless. And in the song too, he mentions how I'm doing all right, things are going on cool in my life. The homie needs help though, so right. I kind of need to do what I need to do for him, because he would do the same thing for me. That also comes off as crooked, because if he's asking to do something, you're sabotaging. I mean, in a sense, you could say if you're sabotaging someone else for the betterment of for your homie or whatever, then that's some crooked stuff to do right there. Right. So in itself, it's just crooked. Yeah. So, but I like how those two go from, hey, people and myself are crooked. However, I'm going to do anything for my friends.
Yeah, if they need something, I'm there.
I'm there. I'm there when you need me. They're there when I need them. And then going into, we mentioned Brenda's got a baby. We talked about that earlier in the cast. Just, she was, raped by her father or stepfather.
Something like that. I think just
father figure. Yeah. Uneducated, because he was, to be honest with you, and I don't know if it's because of the field I work in, but when he was first describing her, he almost made her sound like special, like she had a disability. Yeah. What did he say? That she was, not that she was stupid, but
she didn't have brains or something like that.
She didn't have brains. Yeah, so, being taken advantage of to the point
Well, she was 12 years old at the same time too, so how smart can one be when you're that age? Like, you're still developing. Right. You don't know so many things. You don't know even what's happening around you. Yeah. When that's happening to her, she can't understand it.
Yeah, and then it also talks about how, she can't go to a family member because they won't believe her. So, that it's like, okay, well, I have to get rid of this child, but, it's crying. I can't just leave it here. I have to try and do something. So trying to get a job, things not working out, life not working out, family not being supportive, doesn't have the resources around for childcare, doesn't have the resources to get a decent job that can help support her family. Sex sells. I'm in prostitution now.
It's a pretty harrowing tale. Like, it's hard to listen to if you really are paying attention to it. What's funny, it's not funny, but what's interesting is the beat is kind of it's not as dark as you think it would be for the story he's telling. Right. You know what I mean? It's kind of upbeat, and you can kind of nod your head to it. And it was on the radio. He pushed that as a single.
That's a trip that was a single.
Yeah.
But that's a bold move.
But what other song on here could be a single? That's
I know that there's teachers out there that will play changes, to kind of dissect that. This whole album is something that you could dissect. To build, even though it's 3 tracks later, but to build off of Brenda's Got a Baby, A Part-Time Mother, which I thought, is a really cool song, because it really, I work with a lot of single family households.
Well, tell the listeners what you do.
So I work with primarily autistic kids. I do in-home support services. So we come up with a plan, a behavior plan. We help with teaching kids how, something such as toileting, brushing teeth, washing hands, things like that, social skills, how to interact with other people. So when I hear Part-Time Mother, it makes me think of that, because there are families out there, whether if you have a neurotypical child or you have a special needs kid, that, there's drugs in the household. So parents are not always the most attentive. They aren't the most supportive. They can't give their kids what, the resources that they need in order to do well and to function.
Right.
So this one was interesting because it ties into that. She's, as in the title, she's a part-time mother because she's out partying. She's doing this. She's not, hey, you got to settle down and help raise these kids. You got to, ditch that lifestyle. But yeah, I've seen that. I've seen it lived. I've even lived part of that. Yeah, it's a good song.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a really heavy song to end the album on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, much like the whole album's pretty heavy, content-wise. But this song really gets, he's really pushing the listener to pay attention to what he's saying and the things that are going on around it, the bad things that are going on. He's shedding light to it and saying, hey, this is going on. We need to make some changes. We need to figure this out because this isn't right. This isn't going to help us in the long run. Our community is kind of falling apart by these things that are happening. And then when I'm not sure who the female rapper is, but when she goes on, she tells the story of being raped.
Ooh, yeah,
and abuse. And it's wow, that's really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, you can almost say she's taking the perspective of Brenda because in the lyrics, she mentions how, I got raped by my stepdad. Maybe that's where I got mixed up between this song and Brenda's Got a Baby and the stepdad and dad. She can't go to her mother because her mother's not going to believe her. They're going to get into a fight about it. So yeah, and then she's trying to take measures to make sure that doesn't happen. But then also still, she's in school right now. So I like the line, every day I make a class and yet I'm missing periods. The thought of pregnancy is in my head now and I'm fearing it. I like that clever wordplay of I'm in class trying to not miss periods, but I'm missing periods,
right.
Actually. So this song is deep. Maybe the second deepest one on the whole album's deep. But.
Her name is Angelique. Came in rapping about some really deep stuff. And it's kind of when I listened to it, it kind of took me back. I was like, oh man, this is a heavy way to end an album.
Mm-hmm.
This is
not on a good note.
Yeah, not on a good note. It's not like in the movies, usually there's a happy ending. There's no happy ending here. He's leaving it he ended the album kind of taking it to the next level. You really want to know what's going on? I'm going to tell you. Right.
And I like this song. It starts off with Tupac talking about, hey, this is my mom. She's working with the dope man. She's in and out the house. And then it transitions to the part you were just mentioning where we were talking about with Angelique saying, hey, I'm getting raped by my stepdad. I'm worried about, I need to go to school to make it out. Because we look back at the rest of Tupac's album, it's hey, we got to learn ourselves. So if you want to say that she's embodying that, she's impacted by what's going on. But then the third verse of it takes place, him sleeping with the part-time mother. And just I got what I needed. I'm sending her back off to do what she needs to do.
Because we just dove into the lyrics. What do you think about the overall sound of the album? The direction that he took, the sound of it, and the production?
One of the things I really like about 90s hip hop and rap is I really like this old sound. I don't know how to describe it, what words to use to say it, but I really like the sound of it. It's just kind of people are just storytelling. They're just telling a story to a dope beat. Nowadays, and this, my personal opinion, but nowadays the music is more spearheaded by the beat and it's more geared towards getting you to dance and just kind of vibe to. This one, the production in this era, I feel is secondary. The lyrics come first. I'm here to tell a story. I would say that you need a good sound to follow it up and listen to. So because if people just want to hear people talking, they'll listen to our podcast. But you need something behind it to kind of, music wise, you need something behind it to carry it.
Right.
So I really like that the beats take a back seat so that the lyrics can present themselves and do their thing.
Yeah, I think going back to what you're saying, the beats are less polished, and I think that's just the times that they're in. They're not using digital equipment. They're not making this on the computer.
Right.
They're sampling old records from the 70s.
Some Stevie Wonder.
Yeah. It's all made by samples. So it's going to have that kind of grainy, raw sound to it, which is very, of the times, like the late 80s, early 90s, that's how hip hop sounded.
Right.
And it's a very timeless sound because you're sampling timeless records from the 70s, you're keeping that sound going. It's timeless. Like that doesn't go away. Whereas opposed to now, when you're making digital songs and it's very polished and of the times, that music's not going to carry on as long. Right. It has less weight to it. Like this kind of music, like you could listen just to the instrumentals and like you could vibe to it, and it would be like
that would be great
cool
background
sound.
music.
Yeah,
if you're reading, if you're hanging out.
But yeah, this album, a lot of it. There's a lot of producers on this album. A lot of it was produced by G-Shock from Digital Underground and some other producers, which is really cool. I mean, they make some great production, some great beats. Also, the Underground Railroad, Big D, The Impossible, Live Squad. So like. I think the sound they crafted for this definitely matched with what he was saying. Like the beats are kind of like they're raw, they're in your face, heavy bass lines, like powerful drums.
And he did a mix too. You mentioned off record. He raps to a reggae tune.
On Violent, and I thought that was because I've never listened to this album before. I've heard Brenda's Got a Baby, but when I heard that song, I was like. What? Like, who raps over a reggae beat like that?
Right.
In the early 90s. Like, I don't think anyone else was doing that.
So I have to go back and ask you this question because I answered this as well, too. So having never listened to this before, combining that with your perception of Pac. So, let's say you heard a lot of All Eyes on Me, all the big hits that are up there.
Right.
What is your thoughts now having heard this album versus what made him big, the beefs, everything that came along with his career until he passed?
This album showed me that he had a direction early on of where he wanted to go with music, where he wanted to take it. He was not in music to just be famous and get big. I know things happened where that came through for him. He did movies and he was in the media a lot, whether for good or for bad. But I think this was like his initial direction. Like he was like a West Coast KRS-One. He's speaking out against injustices, and he's, like I said before, he's using his platform to what he wants to speak out against. I don't think anyone was telling him what to write about. I don't think the labels were coming to him like, hey, you need to rap about these things because it's going to sell. I think it was the opposite. I think the label this was released through Interscope, and it was Interscope's first rap album that they put out to get into that genre. So I don't think they were particularly pleased with this album. Just showing by the sales, like no one really talks about this album. It was never like put out like that.
Right. So
the direction that he went in is like a very underground direction, even though he was on a major label. Like this is a very underground album. It's very not for the radio. It's very not for the masses. It's for a particular group of listeners.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know. It's a great one, and I really think that if your perception of Tupac is just this crazed thug that preaches violence, that makes no sense, that is just about
well, Tupac, like he's such a he's a dynamic figure. Like he's he's definitely has two sides to him. He has the thug life side, and he has the changes side.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, he has both sides to him. He's, dear mama. He has a dear mama side.
Right. There's so many layers. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that if you feel like he is only thug life, this album is one that you should listen to kind of get a better picture of what his career could have been. It was cut short. He released 3 albums while he was still alive, or is it 4? I'm pretty sure it was no more than 4. But there was a lot more to him than just what happened. Similar to Malcolm X, he had a very firm stance on what he believed in leading up to his death. But in the last 2 years before Malcolm X was assassinated, he was actually a lot more inviting. He wanted to work with white people. He wanted to do all this. Right. Depending on how, the time frame of where you want to place things with Tupac in his career, you could say that you could argue, some people may say that he ended on a thug life note, but his career was deeper than that. He's very much for empowering people, telling the stories of real life events and what's going on. So I would definitely challenge people to check out this album to clean up your perception of him. That's what this album did for me a couple years ago. I really opened up my eyes on what he is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is a good album to go back and listen to, especially if you like Tupac, if you're into his music. Go back and listen to this and get a deeper perspective on his views, the type of music that he made later in his career. This is kind of like the foundation for what Tupac stood for,
right? And
what he wanted to be about. Obviously no one's perfect, and he kind of strayed away, I think, at some points in his career.
Yeah, as things happened, like he got publicity from the vice president, and I think in his next album he kind of got into his feels on that and some things, and then then the East West happened, and his career blew up. He got into acting, so things change. It's hard to say and speculate what would have been if he didn't get the publicity that happened after this, because this blew him up afterwards.
Yeah, it's a cool album. Like I said before, I don't think I'm bumping this for other people. I think this is an album that I'm listening to by myself, and I'm dissecting each song, and I'm really paying attention, and I'm like actively listening to what he's saying.
Same. I would say that I'm playing this more for myself. I will play it for people who I feel should have a better understanding, a different idea of what rap and hip hop may be, especially now, because it's not so much storytelling as it used to be. This is an album I would present to people and be like, yo, check out what hip hop was at one point, what the bigger focus was at this particular time. And yeah, I would play it for people to kind of deliver a certain message of like, check out these people and what the perception is, and see if there is any merit to it. Are there any tracks that you're skipping?
Because it's not like an album that you're like having fun listening to, and you don't want to like a track that kind of like you don't like, and it brings you out of that, and then you skip it so you can get back to the songs that you really like. Yeah. This is a song where like they all kind of lead into each other to give you the full view of the album. Like these aren't songs that you put into a playlist and you jam with them. Like This is an album you listen to all at once. You're not I'm not pulling out songs to like put in a playlist and listen to them with other songs.
Right. That's true.
So it's like there's no songs on here where it's audibly where I can't listen to it. It doesn't sound good. I don't like the beat. There's nothing like that on here. But there's also nothing on here that's like, wow, that's an amazing song. I want to bump that with other songs.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like they all kind of fit with each other.
Right. And that's, what I like about this album is that it's a story. It's telling a story. It's telling a story about a group of people. Another thing that a good point you brought up earlier was that, if you're listening to Nas, he's talking about events in Brooklyn, in Queensbridge. Tupac is not specifying areas necessarily. This album, he was in Marin County. He was local to us here. Right. But the events in this album are universal.
Right. I think that's a really interesting point. He I think he purposely didn't choose a specific geography of where he is with this album.
Right.
Which, as compared to other albums of this ilk, like NWA, they're very much saying we're in Compton.
Right.
You know, that's very prevalent throughout their music, is like, you know exactly where they are.
Right.
And they want you to know where they are. Tupac's not saying, hey, I'm in Oakland, I'm in Marin, I'm in Richmond. These are the things that are happening here.
Right.
He's speaking more generally across the U.S. He even says that in a lot of his songs. He's talking about America as a whole.
Right.
He's not like saying, oh, no, this only happens in Oakland, so I'm dealing with it in Oakland. It's like, no, this happens everywhere.
Yeah.
He's speaking for everyone, basically.
Right. And that's what makes it great. I mean, he'll let you know that the Marin County and San Francisco police officers,
right.
he doesn't like.
But that was only one song, one line.
Right.
You know, it's not throughout the album he's speaking out against them.
Yeah, I just more in terms of I find it funny that like, yeah, they suck, but him saying that they suck, but really this is a universal issue.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's different than other conscious albums of this time in that sense. It's not like the NWA or the Ice Cube albums, or it's not like the East Coast like KRS-One and Nas, where you know exactly where they're at.
Right. That's it for Tupacalypse Now. As we said, this is an album I would recommend if you really want a different taste of what current hip hop is. Go back into storytelling and really get deep in to how he perceives, you know, how the Black community is treated, but also looking at how to empower them and get back up. So it's definitely a good listen to. It's a good story.
Especially if you're into Tupac, if you're into 90s hip hop, you're going to enjoy this album. It might be a heavy listen. It might weigh on you a little bit. It might make you think about a lot of things. But it's definitely a good album to go back to and kind of dive into and think about with perspective when he's talking. All right, that's the Rap Thought podcast on Tupac's Tupacalypse Now.